Welcome back. It's been a while for another database episode, but we are heading into Halloween, so I thought I'd get another one up. So let's get straight into it because there's quite a lot to discuss this month. First up, Konami have awoken, it appears, or maybe at least hit the snooze button. With the recent remaster or master collection, which I reviewed over on the IGN channel last week, we have the first big classic collection from them since 2019's Contra Pack, I think. As per those, though, they're really all digital only. Even if there is a physical Switch cart, it only really has the MSX and NES games on it. So all the main games, including Metal Gear Solid 1, requires a download, which is a poor start, really. But as my review in comparison to the PS1, the PS2, the PS3, the 360, this is the least of its issues. It's a shocking output, I'm not going to lie. It really falls down on not even high expectations, just decent expectations that us fans have. The reality is these are worse in the gameplay stakes than the Xbox 360 and PS3 HD collection, and even worse than the original PlayStation 1 disc version. They're generally horrible overall. The PC version also appears really bad from reports online. I don't have it, but it appears to be locked to the same 720p and 60 FPS output for Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. Metal Gear Solid still maxes out at 30 FPS on all formats, including PC. And the PS1, MSX and NES titles are all emulation. Now, the limited base options on PC and the current gen also point to these actually being run under a VM-like emulator with the XE, as the performance of Metal Gear Solid is identical across all consoles tested, and I've even seen PC versions that are showing the same rate, so it probably performs identical on that as well. But even Metal Gear Solid 2 has some frame drops, which really should not be the case on something like a Series S, let alone a PS5 or Series X. So if a native x86 or a RISC port, in the case of the Switch at least, to the target platform, which it could also be, there may not be emulated solutions. There is a slight change to the menu screen in terms of using the overlay from the current console you're on, but that's very minor, just an asset swap really. All of this makes even less sense, as it would have been so much easier to improve basic stuff if they had a recompile option on there. So resolution could have been increased, texture filtering, which is the best on the PS5 and PS4 platforms, which are actually much closer to those original HD versions. So this is likely an SDK API related issue on top. Problems with using DirectX, which affects PC and Xbox, which both have terrible, i.e. no anisotropic filtering, looking far worse than the Xbox 360 version, and even the PS2, which is just completely bonkers. But you can check out that review link and learn more about it. But right now, I simply cannot recommend this pack. The cheaper and better HD collection still offers better value and overall better IQ, although the extra content the new pack has is most welcome if badly organised and disjointed into some kind of incoherent package where everything's separate and split up. It isn't fit. If I was managing this project, I would have said this needs to be a single XE where everything's compiled and you just drag it down. Again, I keep referring to this, did it on my IGN review. The Atari 50 is the new benchmark on how you make a very well presented, well packaged archival document and a game management system that has kind of a timeology with it, so you can track it through its time, when it was released, what influences it had, and then just play the ones that are relevant. And if you have multiple versions, which this does have, it has multiple Metal Gear Solid 1 versions, it has PAL versions, NTSC. So yeah, there's the idea behind it is good, and the content could be good. It's just everything around the quality is just lacking everywhere. I mean, the visual issues and performance issues are just unacceptable for something this old. So yeah, can't believe it, but then again I can, because it's Konami, and it's not as if we haven't seen other companies do the same thing. But trying to raise the hype around the back of this, they did also release a new Snake Eater remake in Delta, the actual new first in-game trailer using Unreal Engine 5, because engine numbers are important, and they've now become a marketing tactic, which is sad to me, but it is what it is. And the latest game was shown off at the Xbox Partner Online promo event, and it does look great. I said it in my tweet, it looks good enough to eat, and visually it does. But there's 20 plus years and 3 generations between that original game and this one, or the original Metal Gear Solid game. So there's kind of an expected level of improvement here. So lighting, textures, models, they all look night and day compared to the originals, but that's not really a surprise, and actually not a complete praiseful statement. You can see, overall, some quick comparisons here. I've tried to just throw something together, so I'm not looking at this now as I'm talking, but you'll see it as I'm talking. Versus the old and new, it's a nice boost for sure. Absolutely. There's high quality PBR-based materials, there's volumetric lighting, there's adaptive tessellation on the mud, there's dense and interactive foliage. It captures that improved look of the best game in the series, in my opinion. However, this clearly demonstrates that either A, all the info I had heard about this being in development for years was actually a total lie, which is always possible, and why I never directly claim anything I hear, because sometimes there is some truth sometimes to rumours, but it doesn't mean that they are true. Or B, a big change of plan and tactic and development happened at some point. Again, not only possible, it happens all the time, and not just in games. I know this firsthand. But the main things I took away from this is they look to be making a carbon copy of the original game without any real gameplay and maybe even location and voice capture changes. That would make some sense for cost cutting and obviously speed. But think more along the recent Last of Us Part 1 remaster, which was a massive visual upgrade over those PS3 originals, but it was far less like Dead Space or Resident Evil 2 and other remakes from Capcom. And this leaves me sad, as I really hope this is not the case. And although the original Snake Eater was something of wonder that really built on the technology and immersion that pioneered in Metal Gear Solid 2, which, as I've said often, if that game came out now, it would still blow people away, myself included. I mean, physically based from light, shadows, sounds, blood, motion capture, physical simulation and destruction, this was all in with Snake Eater, adding healing, eating, camouflage, and really bordering on an RPG in many aspects. However, that was early 2000s on a PlayStation 2. The scope that should be available here that can build on that groundbreaking and still largely ahead of the current pack and kind of amplifies the receding progress and technical pioneering we see in the gaming space. And this is an area that I've mentioned quite a few times, and it's probably an area I'm going to dig more into in the future. So do get your thoughts and feedback, and feedback on this. But the drive for ray tracing is a good example of what I mean. Now, ray trace reflections, shadows, and GI are great. Do not get me wrong; they can add a huge amount to the visual quality, but they're just iterative improvements on old and existing techniques such as screen space reflections, shadow maps, ambient occlusion, SSAO, HBAO, image-based lighting. And if the old Kojima team was still making Metal Gear Solid games, I'm sure they would have been much further ahead now. Case in point, even Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation 1 used excellent shadow quality to multiple shadow sources and shadows from objects. It used planar reflections, or essentially a version of a low poly and detail proxy of the main object mapped onto various surfaces to emulate full real-time reflections. Metal Gear Solid 2 went even further with this. The tech was used so heavily, in fact, that it really impressed. You can see here just some of the shots that I'm talking about in the original PlayStation 2 version right here. And if this came out now as a trailer, the internet would be, as it actually was at the time, ironically, when the internet was just blossoming in the early 2000s, this blew people's minds. It would still blow people's minds now. It would be awash with, look at this ray tracing bonkers goodness. And it's simply not the case. It also reinforces why I say technology needs to drive innovation and creativity and not just become a marketing or selling point. Technology is great, but if it leads you down the garden path, i.e. it makes you start worrying about things that don't better gameplay or add something meaningful to what you're trying to develop, then what's the point in having it? It needs to be function far more than form. That's my point when it comes to technology in games and largely technology in the IT space. Look how the path trace versions of Doom and Quake or even Half-Life improve the visual quality. But imagine all that power being used on incredibly wide and dynamic AI, such as what Naughty Dog were actually pushing forward with Uncharted 4 or The Last of Us Part 2, or water simulation that takes into account momentum, buoyancy, force, and follows like a full fluid simulation. Completely procedural destruction, building on the same, still amazing now, Metal Gear Solid 2 glass and bottle physics, or Red Faction's destruction, or even more modern games which we've seen, such as the recent things which we saw, what was it called? I reviewed it on one of my top 10 games of the year. Actually, you know what? I can't remember it. I'll put you'll see it on screen now, but that's the game I'm talking about. And I feel that if Kojima was still striving forward on these areas, and I'm sure that they're doing a lot of that in Death Stranding too. That kind of is really high up on my radar of things I'm looking forward to. But this updated Delta title feels like it's not only missing a huge opportunity to raise the game and put the series back to its greatness, but also reinvent it with so much more. There's no point in following what Kojima and the team did. It was great, it was brilliant, but it's old. Do something new, reinvent it. That's the whole point of going back to old titles and looking at it from a different angle. You know, they could do a lot more, and maybe they are, I don't know this, but, you know, you could have things like a bit, you know, sick, but bodies could be dismembered, injured, and even coerced or convinced into helping you throughout battle. You can hold them hostage, reason with them. The AI and physics and scope in this game feels huge. And as good and visually impressive some of it looked, we've reached a point now I want more realism, physics, simulation, and dynamism, rather than 4 million more pixels and a surface so shiny I can see my face in it. I think back to the old 8-bit games that blew my mind, like Little Computer People, convinced me that I had a mini-man living in my Commodore 64, or Elite, which actually offered me an entire galaxy to explore and conquer. And there's so many greats that all push the industry forward. Mario World on the Super Nintendo reinvented the platform, in my opinion. It was just phenomenally vast, and it was so intelligent. And again, the greatest of all in Mario 64. And Metal Gear was one such title that if it not invented, it revolutionised and pioneered the stealth 'em up. Anyway, rant over. I'm feeling a bit mixed with Delta now, I must say. And although I look forward to it, and I will be covering it, and I will be playing it, and I hope I am wrong, and we have a Konami of old versus Kojima team of now, trying to again push that ladder simulator forward, and I'm really looking forward to seeing just what comes from the rest of the reveals. But right now, I do feel like this is the game that's not actually been in development for very long, and I'm a bit worried that their target scope is way too low on that ladder. As expected, we have the brand spanking new PlayStation 5 Slim. They've now bumped it to 1TB, so that's going to help a little bit, although digital games are going to keep ramping up in terms of some of the games recently are just monstrously large. Classic one is obviously Modern Warfare. So what we've got is, as expected, a Slim with a detachable drive, so that information was correct. £100 or $80 or £100, which is not great exchange rate there, if I must be honest. €120. So it's great though. I'm a big fan of having that separate drive, so you can actually detach it and use that as a separate option. You can buy digital now and then later on get a drive, which means digital isn't locked out to always being a digital, which is much, much better. I'm assuming Sony are going to use that as a gauge in terms of how many people are really interested in digital or physical. Really, that's the classic here. And then they're not kind of spending a load of money on making a drive when actually nobody really wants them and they're sitting around pointless. So people out there, if you hear my please go and buy a PS5 with a digital add-on for the drive itself, or buy the physical disc itself and then use that model. And if you've got a digital drive now, hopefully there's an option here to upgrade the old digital to USB via a USB port, maybe. I don't know. Probably not, actually. It's probably an internal connector. I'm looking at that. So we'll see what the connector is. I'm reading this at the same time it's come out. So this is all kind of me trying to get things out quicker than before. No editing, just recording, capturing my screen, and you seeing what I see at the exact same time, which I've been trying on a few others. So what we see here, we can see that the US price has gone to $499 and the digital is $449. So the UK price is $479 and $389. So actually that's not more expensive, is it? That's the same. A horizontal stand with the new PS5, also a new vertical stand with PS5 models, will be sold at 30 quid. This rolls out in November, so you've got a couple of months till it rolls, next month sometime. I will be picking one up. I do have sources that are going to get me one, so I will have one coming very, very soon, and I'll be comparing them, but don't expect much difference. But I'll be interested to see what the power usage, thermals and all the kind of stuff inside that they've done with this. So we'll be ripping it apart and giving it a good thorough analysis, be rummaging inside the PlayStation 5 innards. So look out for that. It's going to come just on the back of Spider-Man 2 coming out, Alan Wake, Call of Duty. I'm looking at that at the moment, and the beta. It's a bit smaller. It's got slightly less weight, but it has all the same specifications, up to the same speeds as before. No change there. And again, as mentioned before, a lot of these internals will be better, but they downclock them. Certainly the RAM, I'm pretty sure that'll be better RAM, but it'll be downclocked to just software match it in terms of the speeds of the previous one, so you're not getting splits. The SSD is probably going to be a better spec as well, but again, it will be downclocked to run at the same speed, so you're not getting more, but you might see some differences here. You might see some minor improvements on this, so I'll definitely look out for that. So yeah, it's going to roll out in November in the US, direct from PlayStation.com, which I'm assuming you can't buy it yet. As noted there as well, I did see that they are still, once the inventory of the current PS5 is sold out, and the new PS5 will become the only model available. So get them while they're hot, guys and girls. They're going to swap the old one for the new one, and that's again what that clearing of the pipes was that I said a few months ago on my previous database and on Twitter. So that's again just reinforcing that this is them trying to make sure that they're going to swamp the market with this. It would be good if they had an option to replace the old one, assuming that the design they won't be able to do that though, because it's not going to work. It just looks like a standard internal laptop drive, to be fair, standard Blu-ray drive, just a modular plug in and plug out, nothing different there. And that makes sense because, you know, Sony Vios and all that. It's not as if they don't know what they're doing on that score. Be interesting to see what they do with the drive in terms of the channels. Like I say, the specs look the same. So looking at the specs, what are they saying? SSD 1TB, 5.5 gigabytes. So yeah, they're going to say that, but potentially it might be slightly better, the latency and the priority queues. So you might find that loading and some of the specific, basically rift apart, Insomniac, they already utilise it as heavy as anybody else. You might find some situations on there. So I'll be testing that when I get my hands on one, which will be interesting. Although I'm a bit annoyed that it doesn't look like there'll be a UK version, only in the US. I'll have to try and get one from the US, which is a pain in the bum. But yeah, we shall try. We shall try our very best. And I'll be covering that soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah, so overall, pretty good. Pretty good that it's a Slim, pretty good that they're updating the market, and obviously they're trying to utilise the units they've got. I wonder if the detachable plates still work on the old one, because the design's completely different. I know people say, well, of course it won't because it's split, but that doesn't mean the fixing plates aren't the same. If the plates connect together, which they probably do with each other, as a clip plate here, then more than likely it means that the old plate on this side probably still fits. So it probably is the same size. We'll see. But if you go to the link on the direct.com, the first thing you see is the replaceable plates in terms of the connection of the red, blue and white and the connections of the pads and stuff. So they might have some uproar if they end up saying none of these fit these ones. So it'd be good to see what we've got here. 569, 479 for the current one, 439 for the digital edition. What's that say? With two controllers. So the current price for the PlayStation 5 in the UK is 479 with an 825 terabyte drive. Gigabyte? That'd be bargain, wouldn't it? Terabyte, and then you've got the new one at one terabyte. So you're basically getting 175 gigabytes more out of that, which probably equates to, what was it, 660 I think you get. So you probably get about an extra 200 gigabytes, give or take, more, which is best part of 30% more on the old drive. You're getting 60 and an extra 230. So yeah, best part of 35% you're getting, which is not bad, but it does equate to 479 and the 479 with the drive. Yeah, it is 479 with the drive. And the new price, sorry people, I'm getting old, my memory's getting bad. It's the same price. So it's the same price as the current model, with the old digital being 389. So it's the same bumped price of the current uplift that they did a few months ago. Last year, a few months ago. Jesus, a lot of months ago now. So yeah, it's not gone up in price. I'm wrong. So my own tweet is wrong, as you can see here. I said the price has been bumped, but actually it's been bumped from its original price, not bumped from its uplifted price. So it's an interesting one in terms of what they've done this time to get a Slim model out before the Pro. Which brings me to my next comment, actually, which is around the fact that the PS5 Pro... Obviously, I've not changed my mind on this. I don't think it makes any commercial sense, and certainly developer sense, to ship a Pro model at all. But the one thing that does change all of that, and that is to cement a lead and obviously gain an advantage over Series X. Because at the moment, as I've covered in many, many videos over the years, and I said, so remember, I am the only one that said, beat my own chest, because no one else is going to do it for me. I said this would happen on the PlayStation 5 versus the Series X. Said it would happen, said teleprops were irrelevant, everyone called me an idiot, and, well, not everyone, but a lot of people jumped on the hate bandwagon. Microsoft don't deliver, they're over-promising, it's not going to be the same way. And here we are. Everyone's agreeing now. Even Digital Foundry have come round to that way of thinking. So now they're saying exactly the same thing that I said at the start. So this isn't about I'm right. It's about listen to people that tell you the truth at the start. At this point, you've got a PlayStation 5, which is on par, sometimes better than the Series X. It's certainly no worse. As Mark Cerny said, as Sony promised, as I said, and there we are. But if they do deliver a Pro at this point, the only reason it makes sense is to cement their lead over Series X, effectively make Series X look even worse, because you can market the best version on the PlayStation 5, as they did with the Pro, so you get that benefit on top. But also it competes against PC, which is struggling, because PC doesn't really have a USP. Nvidia are doing a very good job, in my opinion, linking with certain teams and partners to get the best out of it. So Cyberpunk ray tracing is superb. It absolutely, from a technical perspective, they've done a great job. But that engine's dead. You know, CD Projekt Red have kicked it to the curb, and Unreal Engine is dying in terms of finances. But that was always the case because they were giving away games on Epic for free. But being good at technology doesn't make you a good businessman. I know firsthand. So that aside, the PlayStation 5 Pro makes sense because if they can get a machine out that uses the latest version of RDNA and it uses a better CPU, it uses potentially, you know, they could up this to from 16 gig to 20 gig. They could go to 24 gig. They could do something in the memory space which would make a conceivable difference to performance. They probably won't, but they could. Bandwidth will certainly go up because, as I've just said on the PS5 Slim, you're going to get faster speeds anyway just for the same price. That's just the way nodes work. So that's how technology evolves. So they're going to get that anyway. So it's not a huge amount of input. But what they could do with this modular design, is have the same layout, the same construction, and even have that, you know, the disk speed hot swappable in terms of going from PS5 Pro to PS5 Slim. You're going to have a machine that can then compete with the 4080s, the 7900s in this world, because it could be at that level. And if you factor in that you've now got FSR2 frame generation with low latency and other technologies that are coming into the fore, and potentially Sony have got their own version, they don't need AMD. So they've probably got their own AI technology on there as well in terms of reconstructing frames using machine learning. If they expand that level of their GPU, they could have a DLSS competitor that Sony make that allows them to deliver ray tracing, effectively mirroring what NVIDIA have just done in terms of boosting ray trace performance. And they've got Insomniac on that score. Now, Insomniac have led the way in terms of ray tracing on console. I've said this before, I'll say it again, it's always been the case. So they certainly have a lot of expertise. And Mark Cerny's a clever guy. He's very embedded in all these software teams and software houses. He's shipped games over the years. So my suspicion is if they do have a PS5 Pro, which is looking very likely that this is the case, and, you know, like I say, I'll stick by what I said. Commercially makes no sense, except the Activision deal, Microsoft trying to take over the market. There is no market if everyone's on your platform and you own it. So therefore the Activision deal doesn't make as much sense, because let's be honest, Modern Warfare sells mostly on PlayStation. You know, it's 2-to-1 ratio, whatever it works out at. PC, console and Xbox, they're not really competing with PlayStation on that score. But if Microsoft can't deliver a machine that mirrors it, and remember, they've just signed a 10-year deal with Sony, so Sony have done a good out of this deal. They've just got 10 years of Call of Duty. So they've got 10 years, basically, got a ticking time bomb to replace Call of Duty. If they get a PS5 Pro out, they can then get graphics hardware and technology that's portable across all PC levels. So Cyberpunk, for example, could run all of the ultra settings that it does on PC at Psycho overdrive levels that the Series X couldn't. They could do that now this generation. All of the VR stuff on PSVR2 will be ramped up to the hilt in terms of being able to deliver proper current generation quality in VR space. So things like Gran Turismo would be massively increased, which makes Forza look even worse, and I'll get to that in a video because that is just a cluster. So effectively the PS5 Pro could be a very performant console that for, well, what we're talking now, 20 plus years, where PC and console are on a level playing field, and potentially with the low-level APIs and the optimizations, and certainly first-party studios of Sony, they will have an advantage that NVIDIA won't have, and they'll beat AMD at the same score if it's the same hardware. So I do suspect you could see a PS5 Pro that will cement their lead, that will give them the marketing rights to say better than 120 FPS on every game, all of those kind of things, because that's effectively where FSR3 works. If you're running at 30 FPS, 40 FPS, it's not going to work. It can work at 40 FPS. And again, I'll get to that in a minute. But there is stuff there that means you could get a 60 FPS title and boost it to 120 FPS and sell every game with 120 FPS mode. And ray tracing could be significantly ramped up, meaning you could not only get modern titles with ray tracing, and it means first party can go all in on pushing visual quality, but you could also get retro titles on there as well. And fundamentally, VR benefits most from this, because you're going to end up with a title that can currently hit 60 FPS on the current console with reduced visual effects, or hit 60 FPS with maximum visual effects, and then you use FSR3 or whatever solution Sony may have themselves to reconstruct that back to 120 FPS. And instead of time warping just the head movement, the entire game is that way. Latency is an issue, and that's something they're probably working on in the background, but that's another option. And realistically, this means that you've got a console that, because people talk about development, and the Series S is a good example, I've been talking about it for a while, ever since it came out. The problem with multiple SKUs is annoying for development. It absolutely is, of course it is. But it's easier to scale up than it is to scale down. So a far more powerful PlayStation 5 Pro is not as big a headache as a far less powerful Series S. That's the reality of it, because you're cutting things to get it to fit. Whereas it's the other way around. You're making the PlayStation 5 version anyway, and then you're scaling up. And that's why a lot of PC versions are high-end. They're the console versions with whatever they can scale up. So all those settings fit onto the PS5 Pro perfectly. And it means you're not getting cutback versions. And again, it's all around marketing. It means you could then say, we have the same version as NVIDIA or AMD, give or take. Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be exactly the same as the highest end 4090 level GPUs, but it ain't going to be that far off. And everyone's using reconstruction now. As I said years ago, everyone's using the frame interpolation. So we're all in the same boat. So at this point, you're not really 4K. You're not really 120 FPS. So everyone's lying. So everyone's telling the truth. It's like The Incredibles, isn't it? If everyone's super, nobody will be. So, like I say, there is a market for the PS5 Pro. I don't expect it to be dirt cheap, though. Judging by what they've done with the PS5 Slim, I would expect that if you're going to get potentially double the performance out of it, they could go the Apple route and say, do you know what, let's see if somebody will buy a £799 console. Hey, do you know what? It could sell. It could sell very well because people will pay for quality. It's been proven time and time again. And it means that you've then got literally 3 levels of entry, which are all modular by design. You've got a digital version, which means you can enter the PlayStation 5. Again, this is marketing for you, because they'll say PS5 starting from £389 or $449, and then going up to $800 or £800. That means you get the full suite of the whole gamut, basically. You've got the whole plate there right in front of you, the smorgasbord to pick from in terms of what do you want best. Do you want cheap, effective, high quality, high performance, or do you want absolutely best visual quality, best performance, and pay the price for it? There you go. And you can get a digital version and then later on update it to a physical one if you want to, and get all those backwards compatibility titles. And the other caveat there is, if they have been working in the background, which some of the things I said quite a while ago was around the fact that they were, then they could end up delivering here is a full suite of PS3 titles running on your hardware. An updated PS5 Pro could be the only model that delivers that locally, and they could still deliver that same option by using the cloud-based version, but with PS Plus. So there is options here in terms of them enabling that as a big marketing USP. So I'll be interested to see what they do on the PS5 Pro. So like I say, I don't think it's impossible now. I've always thought it was possible, but now I'm leaning heavily towards the fact that I think it is very likely that the PS5 Pro will come next year. And the reason why is they're going all out to basically kill the competition, because Microsoft have declared war on them. They're going to declare war on Microsoft. As I said before, the cut price, the aggressive marketing, this Slim now, and I expect some big push, cutthroat actions in terms of getting games out the door. Stop dilly-dallying. which is probably my next part, which is a lot of people are saying about games quality pushbacks. I know we've just seen that Naughty Dog have cut, basically, as I expected, to be fair, the multiplayer version of The Last of Us, which isn't really a surprise, Factions. And I can talk firsthand around this. Since COVID, the dreaded C word, it's changed how people work. And working remotely doesn't work for everything. And I don't care what anyone says, it doesn't improve productivity. It can improve productivity in terms of people can speak more, they can get access to meetings easier, they delegate their time better, all of that. But are they more productive and do things flow, and are they managed as well? No. I know that firsthand. We've seen it in the games industry. I've seen it firsthand in all of the areas I work in, and I work in the public and private sector all the time. I work in large-scale cloud deployments, hybrid cloud. I work in different developments, physical data centers, software development, deployment, everything. And I know that everyone has gotten worse because it's harder to get people to join calls, and there's always the excuse of, my internet's gone down, all that. And you get all of the caveats around working from home where it can drive people crazy. You end up saying, am I working from home, or is my home now my work? And I've been there, I've done that. You end up working more hours, you're not as productive because your brain's not switching off. So it's a balance. And the travel to work and back again is that kind of that split. You need that psychological split. And sometimes in the summer I used to ride my bike to get that split. I'd go for a burn around on the streets before I came home. And that was a way to unwind if it was a nice summer's day. You don't do that when you're working from home. So I do think there's going to be a lot more impact on some of the teams delivering quality. We've seen probably one of the slimmest years from PlayStation in terms of first-party content. Naughty Dog have failed multiple times in terms of delivering on their promises. And other teams haven't delivered either. God of War Ragnarok was good as it wasn't as good as the original, and it kind of went in weird directions, which I don't think was great. It was understandable and I expected it, but it wasn't great. Microsoft have been terrible. I know I get a lot of hate for that, but it's true. I don't care what anyone says. Starfield hasn't lived up to the hype. It didn't live up to my expectations. I've already stopped playing it. I've finished it. I finished that before review or just after. I moved on, and I'm back to playing things like No Man's Sky. Forza's a disaster in terms of what they promised and what they've delivered. It doesn't compete with GT7 on any level in terms of the quality. It's a good game, don't get me wrong. It's a perfect Game Pass title, and this is exactly what I mean. You don't get AAA titles for Game Pass prices. That's just the way the market works. So what you've got is a situation where people are buying games now or paying for Game Pass now, and they're expecting, Gears of War, that quality. They're expecting Halo. They're expecting Forza or Forza Horizon when it originally came out. Some of the the highest quality games, even things like Perfect Dark, which I was looking forward to, that's been completely canned. And a lot of this mismanagement, and Microsoft are good at it because they just silo their workload. So again, expertise. A lot of people talk about this online and stuff, and they don't understand business. I mean, people said about the retirement of Jim Ryan, but businesses like Microsoft and others, and many, many others, Sony will do the same thing. They contract a lot of work. That's just the way it works. You when a game goes into development and they claim it's been in development for 10 years and all this kind of stuff, and I know because I've been with companies that do the same thing, and I'm sitting in the background thinking, what a load of waffle. Things aren't in development. People started it. So somebody might have had an idea, somebody's go away and they're doing an ROI, they're doing some kind of, proof of concept, a POC, and they're looking at a solution. And then when that becomes viable, it ramps up and you end up going from a concept to a deliverable, and that deliverable gets milestones attached to it, and all of a sudden, is it a viable product? Games come the same way. It's perhaps probably more so because games are more kind of artistically driven in terms of their design. So you end up with a game that says, actually, it's been in development for 4 years. It hasn't. Somebody's been tinkering away on stuff for maybe 6 months, 8 months. It's got ramped up a year. When it ramps up, when people say development ramps up, that's when contractors come in. That's what they always do. And Microsoft will rely heavily on it, and other teams will. Sony tend to contract out and outsource in terms of using, asset management teams and CGI teams, and a lot of that is standard stuff. So they get separate companies to do, sometimes even in-game, in-engine cutscenes, but certainly offline ones, and they render those separately. You get developers in, you contract them for 6 months and 12 months, and this is the thing. This is the problem that I see when you get contractors in, and I'm a contractor. I do a lot of contract work. I have done. You end up with a situation where if you're in this space and you are paid a fixed amount per day or per week or whatever, and you're not milestone driven, or your milestones are not completely within your control, because remember, this is all about stakeholder management, races, and who owns what. So you end up with a situation where if I take another year to deliver this game and you don't blame me for that year, then why would I not take another year? Because I get another year working for you doing this game. So that happens. That's a real psychological thing. So companies can sometimes be masters of their own destiny, or at least contractors can, by looking at the situation. And if things can be delayed and it doesn't hinder their contract and it doesn't hinder their reputation, then why wouldn't they? So that's the danger of contracts. I'm not saying everyone, so don't get me wrong. I'm giving real world examples that I know firsthand. So people do this. I've worked with people that have done this. I haven't done it myself because I've never been in that situation where I'm getting those kind of risk-free situations because of where I am in a project. But if you are and you can, then you probably would, or at least, let me rephrase that, some may do that. So you've definitely got a situation where people have delayed. And what we've seen is years of that now. We've seen 3 or 4 years. And look at the quality of the games coming out. Look at the productions misses, the silly, pre-scripted responses on PR on Twitter to say, we are really sorry that we didn't deliver this game, we need more polish, blah blah blah. And all of that is marketing, right? Internally the teams are sweating their bums off and whatever. I'm not saying anyone's not working hard on it, but you have a situation where that's now become commonplace. But also the quality of the games. Mortal Kombat, for example, Mortal Kombat 1, which I've got a separate video here, I'm not going to kill it. That's just a disaster on the Switch. Let's be honest. That's a good example of probably outsourced, probably managed and mitigated elsewhere. And we've had many other titles that have done that. Redfall's just got a patch update, and that's just come out of nowhere. Forza looks unfinished. Well, it isn't finished because it doesn't have split screen. It's going to have less content than less tracks than the previous games had at launch, and they're coming later. What does that tell you? A subscription model. That's what happens. So this is what we've become. We've become used to getting stuff, pay now, play later, that kind of philosophy. And I'm tired of it. I mean, my son's a big Monster Hunter fan. He bought Monster Hunter, what was it? Monster Hunter Rise? No, he's not listening. Monster Hunter Rise, I think it was, on the Switch. I'm sure it's called Rise. And that was completely unfinished. Didn't even have all the story chapters. And yet he was fine with it. And then you get an additional DLC. You pay for that and it adds it on top. And it's just mad. That's what people have accepted. It's just crazy. But the problem is that companies, and I know firsthand, will bite your arm off because they're just now saying, well, it doesn't matter, just ship it and we'll patch it later. And sometimes you can turn that into a bonus. Cyberpunk, for example, that has really turned itself around. No Man's Sky, another one that was completely and utterly not what they promised, wasn't really fit for purpose, didn't really deliver anything on the promises they made, but they turned it around and they did it all for free. So they kind of took a hit, but they got over it. But you can't keep doing that because people are getting tired of it. I'm getting tired of it. I get review code now, and I'm kind of constantly chucking hours and days away of capturing footage and analysis because there's a patch that's come out mid-review. And it's getting very, very hard to get things out on the day. So I'm going to have to break this down because it's a bit of a rant. But effectively what we've got is a situation where teams, companies, development houses, contractors, and just remote working has conspired against deliverables. And now what you've got is lots of missed milestones, lots of missed release dates. And that's impacting everybody. And that's impacting a lot of teams. And in fact, now it's a good assumption to say whatever date you see, don't trust it. And that's why Sony have gone quiet, because they're aware of it, because they're now aware. Sony's biggest kind of advantage over everybody else is Sony read the room really quickly, really well. They understood that the E3 was dying. They stepped away, as I said back then when the video came out, that they wouldn't come back. It's a cost-saving exercise. They can't keep writing checks that Microsoft can because they're funded elsewhere. Xbox is a cost center. All of that is very different for Sony, whereas PlayStation is Sony's biggest cash cow by and large. Their movie industry is doing very, very well. So it's not as if it's the only thing, but that's why they're going heavy on those areas. And that they can't keep having promises that are missed because it dulls the impact. And it does affect investors. Investors see that. They see the headlines. They see the marketing. They see the online tweets and messages about, you promised this game and it hasn't happened. And Naughty Dog's going to hit them in terms of them delaying and canning that game which has come out. And all they're trying to do, every company is trying to do, is keep the market strong, keep the noise around their marketing, their brand as high as possible, but not sully it and spend a fortune doing it. And they're all cutting costs. So Sony did it first. Apple have done it. Microsoft have done it now. They've completely cut a lot of their costs. They're not spending a fortune on it. And you'll see it over and over again. Nintendo have done it for a while. They've been very clever. They're probably the savviest of the lot. And that's why they're so good at what they do, because they do read the room and they don't let their prices drop. So I do expect Sony will start going down that route in terms of keeping their prices at a reasonable level, certainly for first party, going a little heavier on which games they ship to PC and which ones they don't, because they've had some, games that have just died on PC. A shame, but Rift Apart was never going to be a successful PC game, in my opinion. Steam Deck was its biggest marketplace, in my opinion. That's where it would have sold really, really well. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Sony make a deal with Nintendo and maybe ship some of their games that make sense on the Switch 2 coming out. So again, this is what I see. I see a lot of consolidation in the market. I hate that word and I hate the whole process behind it. But so long as it's done by separate companies on a one-to-one basis, i.e. they can pick and choose where they do it and it's not owned by one conglomerate, then I don't have a problem with it. What I do have a problem is if Sony owned everything, or Nintendo did, or Apple did, and certainly what Microsoft are trying to do right now. I don't like that, because then you end up with the same flavour of everything and they control the market, and that's a problem. That is a problem. We're seeing it in retail, we're seeing it everywhere. So that's one area which I hope doesn't continue at the pace it's continuing, and therefore I want competition. And if Sony and Nintendo are in the market, and Apple are definitely getting in it, as I covered earlier with the iPhone 15, then I do expect us to see kind of a lot of changes in that market. If Microsoft's plan doesn't work, they'll pull out, they'll go publisher only. And if they own a lot of publishers, I think that's what their plan is. They can still leave Xbox as a brand, as a marketplace, effectively, go after the Steam model and sell that across multiple platforms and hopefully get a bigger revenue from it. Cloud streaming, get it into TVs, which they're already starting, get it onto phones, get it everywhere you can and pull out of that hardware market. As I said years and years ago, that this was going to be the case. I think that's the end game for them. Whereas Sony and Nintendo have a different strategy, as do Apple, but I can see the market for gaming shifting quite strong in terms of different directions. This has kind of been a waffle and a thinking out loud. So do tell me down below if these work or not. I'm just thinking out loud with you guys, so it might not be beneficial. This is completely unscripted. This is completely unplanned. This is just, I'm sitting here on a Wednesday afternoon recording this with an hour to spare. So again, if you don't like it, it's kind of a podcast thing. And I'm looking at other ideas as well to keep this more interactive and more active. So I will be going to Q&A. So I didn't even have a list of things to do, but I have got on my board above me some ideas of things I wrote a while ago. Oh yeah, Red Dead Redemption update. So this is a disaster. This was I'm going to show footage here of the capture, but as I said in my review on IGN, I don't understand why they didn't release a 60 FPS mode for the PS4 Pro specifically, but certainly PS5 in backwards compatibility, and then here it comes out of nowhere, stealth update released. I suspect it was because Take-Two, Rockstar, didn't want it. That's what I suspect. I suspect that they didn't want to sully an option of a potential remaster with one of their selling points being Red Dead Redemption 2 quality visuals, as I covered in my IGN review, at 60 FPS on PS5 Series X. That's what I suspect. I suspect the sales have been so bad and so poor for them with the physical version just coming out. What they've done is they've realised that they need to bump that up, and they've pushed that out now to try and gain some momentum on that physical release so that it comes out. Again, it's only worthwhile for PS5 players, and it could have been development. Don't get me wrong, there could have been some issues in that version, the emulator or whatever they've got going on there in terms of the port, that could have had some hiccups on it running at 60 FPS, but I struggle to understand the reasoning behind why this would have been done other than a commercial reason. It doesn't ever appear to be a huge technical issue. Like I say, the caveat is that it always could be, but really, I think they shot themselves in the foot with this one, because it could have been a bigger release and it probably would have had a lot more positive response from the market had it had 60 FPS out of the box. Even if it was just BC on the PS5, although I do suspect that the PlayStation 5 Pro could have done a pretty decent 60 FPS mode. Again, the Xbox reasons, with it being on backwards compatibility, not being launched on those, and therefore this supersedes that brilliant BC version that I covered way back when. It's still 4K, the same, but it's got better image quality on this one due to the almost super sampled, as I surmised actually on my review. I surmised before we knew that it was FSR2, which effectively adds an additional, it's like DLAA effectively on NVIDIA. It improves and super samples the image with almost like an MSAA pass on the image quality itself. And that's effectively what we're seeing here at 4K with better image quality than 4K on any other version, including PC, with now a 60 FPS mode, which is exclusive to PlayStation at this point, on the PS5 and backwards compatibility mode. So, yeah, odd, very odd, but that's it. So, still don't think that was the best option, and I'm sure sales reflect that. Okay, so Patron question time. I thought I'd add some in the middle. So the first one is up from Jedi Mind Trick, and he asks a very pertinent question, I think, certainly about what I just covered earlier on Unreal Engine 4. So, 5. With several high-profile 9th gen games rendering at 720p or lower internally and upscaling to 1440p or 2160, do you think developers are using upscaling tech too aggressively, perhaps to make shipping their games easier? Forspoken specifically had a happy end because Luminous went back and improved base resolutions, but I fear not all games will be so lucky. Yes, I said this when this kind of all came out in FSR1 and FSR2. The thing is, when you lower the entry level, when you lower the base of entry for people, and you don't have to have the rites of passage, and I'm not saying that gatekeeping. I'm not speaking about gatekeeping, and I hate that. But it's about you've got to have some level of experience. You've got to have gone through some challenges. So I've written a rasterizer. That's an example. So I've written one, crappy as it was, poor as it was, basic as it was, but it helps you understand how things work. And I think that I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, and certainly everyone doesn't need to write an engine, because I haven't. But if you've done some level of hardware-focused development, so you understand the hardware. I've written a lot of database, SQL connections, Oracle, and I've written a lot of stored procedures, processes, functions, features that are specific to hardware where it's hosted. And you get to know things like data access, frequencies, latencies, bandwidth, access ports, timings, effectively. You can basically hide latency in certain ways from an application point of view that I've done. And game development is that on another level, especially GPU development. So a lot of what's happening now is people are getting tight timescales. Going back to what I just said before about you've got milestones, you've got things to hit, you've got people paying you, you've got publishers, people that have paid you to do the work. You might be a contractor that is sourced to do, like Red Dead Redemption. Your source, 11 were basically contracted to do a port of an old game to newer hardware. That was an outsourced job. That's exactly what I mean by contractor. They're contractors doing the work. However you want to, it's a contract, it's a deal, it's a relationship, it's strategic partnerships, it's whatever it is. But that is a body of work. So FSR2 is in there because it's open source, it's easy to pick from. It's not like NVIDIA where it's a black box and you've got to hook into their solutions, and there's a lot of weight around that, not only from a development perspective because you've got this black box that you can't get into, but also the fact that you've got this commercial issue that goes on top of it. So therefore you'll pick the low-hanging fruit. And if you've got a game that has TAA or an engine like Unreal Engine that has TAA, and then you don't want to use TAAU and you want to use FSR2 because it's fully scalable across every piece of hardware without any issues, then you're going to use that. But that shouldn't be ever a crutch to not optimize, i.e. look at options and settings that minimize the pressure on the GPU and bandwidth, rather than just saying let's drop resolution and let the upscaler do the work. Because there's a cost to FSR2, there's a cost to DLSS2, there's a cost to all these reconstruction techniques, even Insomniac's temporal injection, so that's got a cost. Every upscaler that reconstructs has a cost, both from a compute point of view, a data point of view, memory as well, and buffers and bandwidth, all of that. There is caveats, and it does pay a lot of that back, specifically bandwidth, but all of that. So you're just going to pick this low-hanging fruit and chuck it on. And we've seen that. So we saw that with Jedi, even big titles, this is what I mean. So we've seen that with Respawn and Jedi Survivor. That shipped with a very poor performance mode. The image quality was very poor. It wasn't fit for purpose. And they improved that by lowering the settings, by getting rid of the ray tracing features, which never should have been enabled in that performance mode anyway on consoles. And they didn't. And they did a quick fix. That's not quite as bad as when you've got a game where the only mode is relying on FSR upscalers. Lords of the Fallen, it looks terrible it looks absolutely horrible on the Series S in its performance mode. I'm glad that it's there, and I'll be covering it very, very soon. But that's a good example of a game that should never have a performance mode. Just turn it off, because right now it's not fit for purpose. It's very hard to see. Everything breaks apart. The resolutions are incredibly low, 640p levels, or 480p, 360p I think it goes down to, the lowest I've counted. And it's just horrible to look at on a 4K screen. It might hit 60. It's not a lock 60. It's nowhere near it. And it's not consistent. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Just don't bother. And I think that we're going to get more and more games that do that until the market pushes back. And this is, again, one of the reasons why the PS5 Pro makes sense, because everyone's aware you can't force developers to do things. Only the market can force development and studios to do things. You, me, and everyone else that buys these games can decide whether we'll put up with it or not. And fundamentally, there's got to be a level, a baseline level. And this is what I say about, I'm not interested in resolutions and pixels. It doesn't matter, to a point. But when you're running a modern game that's at 720p or lower, that's too low for a 4K screen. It's far too low. So for me, 1080p is fine. It's got to be 1080p or higher. If you're going below 1080p, it's too low. And I think, and we have seen, and we're going to see more, just reconstruction techniques, because it's a quick win. And then potentially, if the game sells well enough, or there's enough ROI on doing more development, an improved mode that comes back that bumps the resolution up and optimizes the game at a later stage. But if it doesn't do that, then, and the game doesn't sell very well, then you're just going to be left with loads of games that look really poor. And they're not going to age very well on older hardware or newer hardware if it doesn't scale dynamically. And that's the other caveat around this. DRS has made it easier to just chuck that into the game, so long as all your buffers, it's not easy, don't get me wrong, there's lots of things you have to take into account when you're doing resolution scaling, like bitmaps and all the kind of stuff I've mentioned before. All of that adds a workload. And if your engine doesn't support it, or it's not designed from the get-go to support DRS, you're going to have issues, and you've got to optimize around that. And basically, you've got a code to support these dynamic buffers all the time. And that's why Unreal Engine is going to be very popular for people to just go in, stick on TAAU, or integrate DLSS2 or DLSS3 or FSR2, and that's because all those options are very easily available to them. When you've got a low entry level, people are going to use solutions that are just cheap and easy, or at least move the work to the back end. And if you're chasing a milestone that's really close, and you've got people at your back, wolves at the door, all of that stuff, which I get, then it's an easy win to say, do you know what, we'll lower the resolution and we'll fix that later. And later never comes, as I say. So yes, I do think that's a genuine issue. I did think it would be a genuine issue, but not for big first-party studios. That said, potentially Microsoft still may do it for titles, because, again, Game Pass out the door quickly and contracting work. I can't see Sony first party going down that route, other than maybe some Gaz titles that just have to get out the door. Who knows? But yeah, it's a mixed blessing, I must admit. A double-edged sword. Okay, and let's finish on a positive note and my constant now regular retro nostalgia session, which is again some bits of the past this month. We're going to take a month around, give or take a month anyway, around 30 years ago was Commodore's final throw of the dice. Sadly, as we knew afterwards, their end was already up due to the American division making far too many bad decisions. Now, the world's first 32-bit console, according to their marketing at least, made a big splash here in the UK and much of Europe. And this side of the pond, Commodore knew what had worked, and even post-bankruptcy, they had attempted to salvage a doomed deal to try and save the company. But the 90s was all about that cheeky, edgy banter, like marketing something Sega did with the Nintendo Don't ads in America. And they had a lot more edgier stuff over here in the UK. And Commodore used Sega's own words against them right on their front door in, I think it was Manchester offices. At the time, which is, it would take Sega ages to do this, which is obviously one of Sega's puns. To be this good takes ages, to be this good takes Sega. And that was great marketing. I miss those days. They were great. Some excellent adverts in magazines, some quite risque, the lads' mags and all that. But you know what? It's all fun. You can't take these things too seriously. And in Xmas 93, the CD32 actually outsold the just launched Mega CD, which came out the year before. And actually had over like 50% of the CD market, I think, by early 94 when they went pop. That was less than a year after the machine came out. It was basically an A1200 with a light bootable OS hooked up to a CD drive, and it was born out by like most games, and like the Mega CD actually, it was little more than just Mega Drive games, in this case A1200 games, with animated intros, CD music and extras. And some standouts did come, but sadly too little too late. And it remains a machine much like the Atari Jaguar and even the Mega CD and certainly the 32X that was never fully exploited, but glimpses were present with a few titles. Video for another time. But in hindsight, though, it would have died anyway within a year or so, as we need to remember that, 94, 95, the Saturn and then the rumoured but then unknown juggernaut of the PlayStation would have taken another head. But had Commodore remained afloat, it may have done enough to just fill the coffers, and the PC world may have been a very different place than today. And I think Commodore could have really shook up the market than what became, Microsoft dominated, and then obviously, thankfully, we had some competition in Unix and Oracle and everything else. But I don't know, it's a missed opportunity, and I think some of the court cases and the impacts that Commodore suffered after its huge successes with the A500 and even the 1200 were kind of suspect to me, in my opinion. But it remains a great machine, the CD32, born from the then emerging CD and multimedia craze as it was taking over the world, which capitalised on it did it quite well, I think, overall. It really balanced it well. It was cost effective. The controller was rubbish, but overall I think they did a really good job, and they could have done so much more with it, and it certainly could have gone on to bigger and better things. Certainly it was much better than Commodore's last attempt at a console in the C64 GS anyway. And yeah, I do kind of miss the opportunities that the CD32 offered. So there you go. That was 30 years ago, give or take. So if you remember those days, which I do well, working in London at the time, in fact, heady days and the height. It was when that was the point, the early 90s, the mid 90s is when console gaming became relevant. And PlayStation did a very good job, and they did make it mainstream, but it was Sega and Nintendo, more so Sega, that made it relevant because they really latched on to the teenagers of the time. Mortal Kombat, that kind of came, that was the beginning of that paradigm, in fact, in terms of making it a part of pop culture. It became that way. You had references. I mean, Space Invaders, I was doing it earlier, but then you had things from Sega. You had many titles that were hitting the mainstream. Like I say, Mortal Kombat was a big one. Sonic the Hedgehog was huge, the biggest launch ever. And then Street Fighter 2. And it kind of went on from there. It was all of a sudden cool to be playing games. And that's really thanks to Sega and Commodore and Nintendo's marketing at the time. In terms of Nintendo were a lot more restrained. And that was because of the Japanese influence on what you could and couldn't do. But again, it was something that the Saturn continued, and then obviously the PlayStation made popular. It took what was there and it ramped it up, and that's what was one of the reasons why the PlayStation was so popular. So there you go. Retro Halloween. It's Halloween, it's horror, it's all that thing. So we enjoyed the first kind of few games back in my day. 1988, one that stands out to me for Halloween related was the gory Friday the 13th inspired Splatterhouse. Which took its title from the 80s splatter horror genre coined for Tom Savini films, and he actually did Friday the 13th 1 and 3, so absolutely amazing makeup artist. The Jason Voorhees hockey masked hero, or at least anti-hero, in the arcades. It was a bright, colourful game. Huge sprites, gore, stood out. As a horror fan, I loved it. And the almost perfect PC Engine conversion was just another reason why I lusted over that machine when I saw it in telegames. And something actually I owned quite a few years later and even covered and fixed in its history over a few years ago on this very channel. So it was bloody fantastic. And of course, 30 years ago today as well, in 93, this year, John Carmack, John Romero and id, they changed the face of gaming, multiplayer, horror and graphics with Doom. A game so undead, it still lives on with new releases and work today. And there's obviously more things change, the more they stay the same, as the saying goes, and Doom kind of personifies that to an nth degree. There's lots of stuff that I love about all of this retro area, and I like to put it up because it kind of cheers me up, makes me positive about all the things I like to be positive about in games. I do think sometimes I can be a bit too negative, and I try not to be. It's one of my main aims. I like to see the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and then you try and deliver that message. So retro's great, retro's brilliant, and I do remember those days with a heady smile on my face when the world was just blooming into what it would become. All the opportunities seemed endless with games. And that's it. That's, if you want more retro gaming and Halloween related stuff, I did cover the Medieval series. I covered some old 8-bit classics, which were great. Both those videos available on my channel, which the link I'll stick down below. But if you like what I do here or anywhere else on IGN, then remember you can subscribe, you can share, you can like, you can Twitter it and all that good stuff, which really helps me immensely. And if you want exclusive access or early access to stuff, then you can support me over on my Patreon for a few dollars or pounds a month. It really, really helps me. lots of good stuff coming up over there. Some stuff that they've already got access to that I'm hoping will try to build my style. Anyway, I'm out, but I'll catch you very soon over here or over on IGN. Have a spooky Halloween.